My name is Lena Whitmore, and this is the story of how my family finally stopped pretending I mattered. I showed up to my sister's wedding dressed, smiling, doing what I always did, staying out of the way. But when I saw my name on table 19 tucked beside the coat racks, set for one, I knew this wasn't just oversight, it was tradition. I was the background. I had always been. But that night, something shifted, and by the time the chandeliers dimmed, I was no longer invisible. I pulled into the parking lot at Willowcrest Manor, clutching the small satin clutch that matched my slate blue dress. The air smelled faintly of peonies and freshly mowed grass. It was one of those picture-perfect spring afternoons that seemed to have been curated for wedding photos, every petal in place, every breeze gentle and soft. I stared at the sprawling estate and reminded myself that this day wasn't about me. It was about my sister, Savannah. I smoothed down the skirt of my dress and headed toward the check-in table outside the main entrance. A pair of young women in matching blush dresses sat behind it, laughing too loudly at something on a phone. One of them glanced up at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Last name," she said, already scanning her list. "Whitmore," I replied, the word catching in my throat just a little. She ran a finger down the sheet, stopped, then frowned for a second. Oh, okay. You're at table 19. That's just around the corner in the coat alcove." "The coat alcove?" I blinked, unsure if I'd misheard. "Is that part of the main reception hall?" She gave me a tight smile and shrugged. "It's just off to the side. Super cozy. You'll have some privacy, at least." Privacy. Right, at a family wedding. I tried to keep my face neutral as I took the small place card she handed me. It had a floral border and my name in loopy calligraphy, which somehow made the indignity feel even more formal. I turned and walked through the entrance, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Inside, the main ballroom was already bustling. Gold and ivory tablecloths shimmered under chandeliers, and centerpieces of white roses and lilacs towered above polished place settings. Every detail screamed Savannah. Or, more accurately, it screamed Mom Diane Whitmore, queen of appearances and curated perfection. I scanned the tables for familiar faces, saw my cousins near the front, a few old family friends near the dance floor. Everyone looked comfortable. Included. Like they belonged. I walked past them all, past the glimmering main hall, and into the side corridor where the coat check area had been transformed into an afterthought of a table. There it was. Table 19. Sandwiched between a coat rack and a side exit. It was round, small, and set for one. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The tablecloth didn't even match the others. It was plain white, no overlay, no floral centerpiece, just a small votive candle flickering half-heartedly. I slid into the lone chair and placed my clutch on the table. My dress wrinkled uncomfortably under me. "Well," I murmured to myself, "at least I'm close to the exits." From the hallway, I heard heels clicking, deliberate, sharp. A moment later, my mother appeared in the doorway, dressed in deep emerald satin and pearls, her silver hair swept into a sleek chignon. "Oh, there you are," she said with a smile that could cut glass. I thought this was thoughtful. "You won't have to weave through the crowd when you want to leave early." "Leave early?" "Of course. Because why would I stay?" "Mom," I began, keeping my voice calm, even, "why am I not seated with the family?" Her expression didn't change. "The main tables are full, honey. And you said yourself you don't love crowds." I thought this would be more comfortable. "You didn't think to ask me?" Savannah wanted everything organized. I didn't want to bother her with last-minute changes. I stared at her, trying to find some trace of remorse, of understanding. But there was none. Just that same pleasant mask she always wore when doing something she knew would hurt me. "I see," I said finally. She tilted her head. "Try to enjoy yourself, Lena. Don't make today about you." And with that, she turned and disappeared back into the glittering mass of well-dressed guests. I sat there, surrounded by silence and the distant sound of clinking glasses. A waiter passed by, hesitated, and then placed a flute of champagne in front of me. "Thanks," I murmured, lifting it to my lips. It was warm. I watched as guests began filing into the main room, laughing and chatting. I caught a glimpse of Savannah entering from the far doors in her wedding gown. Ivory lace, sweetheart neckline, delicate veil trailing behind her. She was stunning, of course. She always was. The room seemed to tilt toward her like a sunflower to the sun. Someone called her name. She turned, laughing, and waved. She hadn't seen me. Or maybe she had. I set the glass down. My fingers clenched in my lap, nails pressing into my palms. The weight of old memories settled over me like a heavy shawl, years of birthdays where I was the photographer, not the guest. School ceremonies where Mom forgot to come but made a big show for Savannah's. Every time I was told to understand, to be flexible, to not make a fuss. I glanced down at the place card again. Lena Whitmore. Table 19. It could have been worse. They could have asked me to serve. Across the room, a familiar figure approached. He was tall, clean-shaven, with a slightly rumpled navy blazer and that same lopsided grin I remembered from Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago. "Lena," said Grant, Savannah's fiancé. "I didn't expect to find you all the way back here." I smiled faintly. "Not my choice." He looked around the sad little alcove and grimaced. "I'm sorry. I thought, never mind. You look lovely." "Thanks," I replied, unsure of what to do with the compliment. He hesitated, then said, "Savannah's lucky to have you here." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the small crease between his brows, the way his hand tapped nervously against his thigh. "You okay?" I asked. He opened his mouth, then seemed to think better of it. "I just hope she's not making a mistake," he muttered, almost too low for me to hear. He blinked. "Excuse me?" "Nothing." He smiled quickly, too quickly. "Enjoy the ceremony." And with that, he vanished into the crowd. I sat back, heart beating a little faster, watching the doorway he'd disappeared through. For the first time that day, I wasn't just humiliated. I was curious. The music shifted to a delicate string arrangement, signaling that something or someone important was about to happen. All the heads in the main ballroom turned in unison, and I caught a glimpse of Savannah stepping through the arched doors like she was floating. She wore a custom A-line gown that hugged her figure just enough to show it off without losing an ounce of grace. The lace sleeves shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, and her cathedral-length veil trailed behind like something out of a bridal catalog. She wasn't just the bride, she was the star of her own movie. Mom was right beside her, of course. Adjusting the veil. Fixing a stray hair. Whispering something that made Savannah laugh softly. The two of them looked like a perfect painting of mother-daughter harmony, completely unaware, uninterested that I was watching from the shadows like a background character. I stood there, half hidden by the doorway between the coat alcove and the main hall. I hadn't realized I'd gotten up. My champagne glass still sat on my lonely table, untouched. Mom glanced my way briefly, her eyes skimming over me as if I were part of the decor. Her expression didn't change. No smile, no wave. Just a flicker of recognition followed by a return to her daughter of the hour. Savannah spotted me next. Her gaze paused a second longer. Then she gave me a smile that looked almost pitying. She turned back to the crowd and waved, soaking in the admiration. When her eyes came back to me, she gave a subtle shrug, as if to say, "What did you expect?" She didn't need to say the words. I'd heard them all my life. Growing up, we shared a room until Savannah was 10. That was the year she got her own space, with new white furniture and pastel walls. I stayed in the old room with the peeling wallpaper and hand-me-down bookshelf. When I asked why, Mom said Savannah needed space to grow into herself. When school dances came around, Savannah always had a new dress from a boutique downtown. I wore a borrowed one from our neighbor's niece. Even then, she never thanked me for keeping quiet about it. And when I got accepted to a summer science program in Boston, something I'd worked for all year, Mom said we couldn't afford the travel. A week later, Savannah got tickets to a performing arts camp in Chicago. I didn't even ask how they paid for that. I knew. It wasn't just about favoritism, it was a pattern. A framework. I walked back to my table, heels echoing louder than I meant them to. I sat down just as a small group of guests arrived and were directed to the nearby tables. No one approached mine. Not even a passing glance. It was like I didn't exist in their version of today. A few minutes later, Mom came sweeping through again, her face glowing with effort and pride. She stopped by my table as if doing a final inspection. "You're all settled?" she asked without waiting for an answer. "I am. Thanks for the quiet spot." She smiled, clearly missing the sarcasm or choosing to ignore it. "It's easier for you here," she said, eyes scanning the room. "Less pressure, no small talk." "Is that what this is? A kindness? I thought you'd appreciate not having to be in the middle of everything." "Of course. Because God forbid I ever take up space." She straightened a votive candle on my table that didn't need straightening. Then she looked at me, really looked, for half a second. "Let's not make today difficult, Lena." I wasn't planning to. She gave me one more cool nod, then disappeared again in a swirl of satin and perfume. I sat back, watching her go, the air around me stiff with unspoken things. My fingers toyed with the edge of my place card. A waiter dropped off a small plate of hors d'oeuvres. I picked at it, appetite gone. Savannah had always known how to shine. Even when we were kids, she had this way of drawing light to herself. It didn't matter if it was a school play or a family barbecue. People just gravitated to her. And I'd learned early on that the easiest path was not to compete, to shrink. To make myself useful instead of visible. But something about today made the old bargain feel especially bitter. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Daniel. "Stuck in traffic. Be there soon. You okay?" I typed back quickly. "Yeah. Just scenic views from the coat section." He sent back a single heart emoji. I stared at it for a moment, grateful and a little embarrassed by how much it helped. A loud round of applause broke out from the main room. I turned my head just in time to see Savannah and Grant take the stage. She was glowing, arm linked through his, posing as cameras flashed around them. Grant's smile looked practiced. Not fake, exactly, just careful. He caught my eye briefly and looked away fast. I filed that away. Savannah raised her champagne glass and said something I couldn't hear. The room erupted in laughter. She tossed her hair, basking in the moment. My mother dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin. Like this was the culmination of everything she had ever worked for. Maybe it was. I stood again, unable to stay still. I moved toward the edge of the ballroom but didn't cross the threshold. I couldn't. Not with everyone watching her. Not when I didn't belong in the frame. So I stayed in the margins. Again. 4 years ago, I flew home for Thanksgiving after taking a last-minute case that kept me in Seattle longer than expected. The leaves in Asheville were already turning, and the air had that cold snap that made every breath feel sharper than it should. Mom greeted me at the door with her usual efficiency, not warmth. She was wearing one of her wool cardigans, hair perfectly set, and gave me a quick once-over before saying, "I hope you didn't bring laundry. The machine's acting up." No hello, no hug. Just logistics. I smiled tightly and stepped inside. The house hadn't changed, same muted tones, same arrangement of family photos along the staircase. Except the photos had. One of mine had been replaced. Savannah again, in a graduation robe, this time from culinary school. Centered, framed in gold. I glanced to the far corner, where mine used to be. Empty hook. "I brought a bottle of wine," I said, holding up the bag. "That's nice," she replied, already walking toward the kitchen. "We have plenty, but sure." I told myself not to take it personally. That had become a reflex. Like flinching before you're even hit. After dinner turkey, a little dry, conversation even drier, I wandered into the den. I hadn't been in that room in years. The light was softer in there, bookshelves lining two walls, old photographs tucked between vases, and forgotten keepsakes. I used to love curling up on the old leather chair in the corner, escaping into a book while the rest of the house buzzed around me. As I ran my fingers along the spines of the books, one fell sideways. I reached to fix it and noticed a small leather-bound journal wedged behind the shelf. Not dusty, not hidden deep. Just out of place. Curious, I slid it out and flipped open the first page. It wasn't mine. And it definitely wasn't Savannah's. The handwriting was unmistakably Mom's. Elegant cursive, meticulous loops and margins. At first, I assumed it was one of her recipe notebooks. But then I saw the date. The 3rd of August, 2002. Savannah started high school today. She looked so grown up in that navy skirt, her hair just brushing her shoulders. I told her she'd be amazing. She smiled like she already knew. I kept reading. Page after page. Savannah's first recital. Her acceptance letter. Her first breakup. Mom's worries, her hopes, her dreams for her youngest daughter. Every entry, a glowing portrait of support, pride, unshakable belief. There wasn't a single mention of me. Not one. Even the years that I had been home promotions, a serious health scare, the time I helped cover part of the mortgage when Dad's business nearly folded. Nothing. It was as if I didn't exist in the emotional timeline of her life. I sat on the floor, journal in my lap, staring at the fireplace. It wasn't anger that hit first, it was confusion. Then the kind of numbness that spreads too quickly to stop. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. She stepped into the den, hands wiping off on a dish towel. "What are you doing in here?" I held up the journal. "You left this on the shelf." She looked at it, then at me. Her expression didn't change. "So? You wrote about Savannah." "A lot." She walked over slowly, took the journal from my hands, and flipped it closed. "She needed me more." That was all she said. I waited, expecting more. A smile, a joke, an explanation. But she just turned to put the journal back where I'd found it. "You didn't think I needed anything?" I asked quietly. She paused. Her back still to me. "Lena, you were always the one I didn't have to worry about. You handled yourself." I wasn't sure if she thought that was a compliment. "That's not the same as love," I said. She turned then, eyes calm and cool. "Love isn't always loud, and I gave you room to be yourself. Isn't that what you always wanted?" I didn't answer. What would be the point? She walked out of the room, and I stayed there, staring at the spot on the shelf where the journal now sat. The next morning, I left before breakfast. She didn't come down to say goodbye. In the airport lounge, I texted Daniel, then still new in my life. "I just realized I've been invisible in my own family for decades." He replied within seconds. "Not to me. Never to me." I saved that text. I still have it. Now, back at the wedding, the memory of that moment felt closer than ever. Sitting at the fringes of this perfect, polished event, it all made sense. It was never about being forgotten. It was about never being seen in the first place. I stepped out into the garden terrace just to breathe. The air was cooler now, shadows stretching longer across the manicured hedges. A jazz quartet played softly in the background, just loud enough to remind everyone that this was still a celebration. I gripped the railing, watching as golden light spilled out of the ballroom windows onto the lawn like liquid honey. I should have just gone home. I turned, intending to make my exit through the side gate when I nearly bumped into Grant. He was standing under one of the pergolas near the edge of the garden, holding a half-empty glass of bourbon and staring out at the darkening sky. His tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked like someone who had just walked away from something important and didn't want to go back. "Sorry," I said automatically. He glanced at me, blinking like he hadn't expected anyone. Then a small smile tugged at his lips. "Don't apologize, Lena. You're probably the only person here I wouldn't mind talking to right now." That surprised me. I thought this was the happiest day of your life. He let out a short laugh, dry and sharp. That's what they tell me. I took a cautious step closer, unsure if I should. But there was something in his posture, tense shoulders, hand tightening around the glass, that made me stay. He didn't look like a man at ease. You all right? He took a sip of his drink, then looked at me more directly. Can I ask you something, and I need you to be honest? I hesitated. Depends on the question. He nodded, then exhaled slowly. Did Savannah ever say anything to you? I don't know. Anything that would make you think she's not really in this for the right reasons? My stomach twisted. I searched his face, trying to read if this was a joke or a trap. But he looked genuinely unsettled. Not angry, not suspicious, just unsure and scared. What makes you ask that? He leaned against one of the columns, staring into his drink. Little things. Things that didn't feel like anything at the time. Like how she always talks about the future like it's hers alone. How she never refers to us as a team. How she dismisses my job like it's a placeholder until something better comes along. I crossed my arms, unsure how honest I should be. She's ambitious. You knew that. Yeah, but lately it feels like she's performing. For her mom. For her friends. Even for me. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He looked at me again. You've known her your whole life. Did she ever say something about me that I should know? Something that you didn't feel comfortable repeating? The question hung there between us, heavy and sharp. I thought about a conversation 2 years ago, at Christmas. Savannah and I had been in the kitchen, alone for once. She was scrolling through her phone, half listening while I talked about my new client, a nonprofit in Seattle. At one point, she said, with a smirk, "You know what I love about Grant? He's so easy to manage. Like, if I ever want to pivot out, it'll be clean." I'd brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just one of her flippant comments, something she didn't mean. Now, standing across from him, her fiancé, on the night of their wedding, I felt that memory slam back into me with a cruel kind of clarity. But I didn't tell him. Instead, I said, Savannah has a way of saying things that sound harmless until you sit with them for a while. He nodded like that confirmed something he already feared. Did she ever say she loves me? I swallowed. Of course. He tilted his head. But did she mean it? I had no answer for that. Not one I could say out loud. He looked away again, quiet. Then he drained the rest of his drink and set the glass down on the stone railing beside him. I keep thinking maybe it's just nerves. Cold feet. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm the only one who doesn't know the full story here. I wanted to reach out, to offer something comfort, maybe, but I wasn't sure how. Or if I should. She's not heartless, I said quietly. He looked at me, eyes searching. Number. She's just never had to fight for anything. Everything was always handed to her. She knows how to win. I'm just not sure she knows how to love. I didn't argue. I couldn't. After a long silence, he pushed off from the column and straightened his tie. They're probably looking for me. Thanks for listening. I nodded. He turned to go, then paused. Lena? Yeah? You're the only one here who hasn't told me what I want to hear. That means something. Then he walked back toward the lights and the music, leaving me alone in the shadows again. I looked up at the stars. They seemed dimmer than usual. Or maybe I just wasn't in the mood to see anything clearly. I heard my name before I saw him. Lena. Daniel's voice cut through the soft hum of music and murmured conversations, steady and familiar. I turned to see him weaving his way through the crowd near the garden steps, dark blazer slightly wrinkled, tie loosened, a sheen of apology in his eyes. Sorry I'm late, he said, reaching for my hand as soon as he got close enough. Traffic from Durham was a nightmare. I let him hold my fingers a moment longer than I usually would in public. His grip anchored me. You made it, I said, and I meant it more than I thought. He looked around, brow tightening as he took in the scene. The music. The lighting. The table set by the coat racks still in full view through the glass doors behind me. They sat you there? I nodded, almost laughing at how absurd it sounded out loud. By the drafty exit. It's thoughtful, apparently. He let out a breath through his nose, not quite a laugh. Jesus. I leave you alone for 2 hours and they demote you to coat check. We moved to a quieter corner of the terrace, away from the flow of foot traffic. There was an old stone bench shaded by an oak tree, half forgotten in the layout of the venue. We sat there like we'd done this 100 times, and in some ways, we had finding the edges of a party to exist on our own terms. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrapped protein bar. I thought you might not have eaten, he said. That, or you were surviving on champagne and invisible hors d'oeuvres. I smiled and took it, my stomach reminding me I hadn't touched anything real since noon. He watched me unwrap it, then leaned back, his arm brushing mine. Want to talk about it? Which part? All of it. I took a bite, chewed slowly, then said, Savannah's glowing, Mom's in her element, and I'm back in my assigned role as the invisible sibling. Daniel was quiet, a beat too long. You've always deserved better from them, you know. Yeah, well, deserving's never been the issue. He didn't press, just let the silence stretch gently between us. It was one of the reasons I loved him. He didn't fill space with noise. He waited for what mattered. Finally, he said, you remember what happened the last time you tried to fold yourself small enough to fit into their version of normal? I nodded. I didn't need reminding. But the memory arrived anyway. 3 years ago, I'd moved back east to help Mom after her surgery. Took a leave from the firm. Let Savannah stay in my apartment while hers was being renovated. Handled errands, cooked, showed up. And in return, I got whispers about how I was overstepping. Taking too much space. Making things about me. It was around that time I found out Savannah had slept with Jeremy. My then boyfriend. Someone I'd introduced to the family at a summer barbecue. She said it had just happened. That he came on to her. That she thought we weren't serious. I'd packed a suitcase and left for Seattle within a week. I didn't return for almost a year. Daniel was the only one who reached out during that time. The only person who said, you didn't deserve that, you don't have to keep paying for being the strong one. I think I thought. If I kept forgiving them, one day they'd see me, I whispered. He turned toward me. But at what cost? I looked down at my hands, palms open in my lap. The weight of every past slight sat there like old stones. You keep giving grace to people who've never earned it, he said. And every time you do, you lose a little more of yourself. It's family. So? Family doesn't mean free passes forever. I met his gaze. There was no judgment there. Just concern, just truth. You're allowed to say this hurts, Lena. You're allowed to not excuse it anymore. I felt something shift in my chest. Not relief. Not yet. But a loosening, like the first breath after holding your lungs too tight for too long. He reached out and brushed a piece of hair from my face. You're not her shadow, he said. You never were. But they'll keep casting you there if you let them. I nodded, suddenly tired. Let's leave soon, I said quietly. He stood first and offered his hand. Whenever you're ready. We walked back toward the building, the noise and light washing over us like a tide. I paused just before the doors, catching my reflection in the glass. Not smaller. Not invisible. Just me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The music from the ballroom had started to swell again, muffling the sounds of clinking glass and laughter as I stood with Daniel near the back terrace. I was just beginning to let my guard down when I saw Eleanor's silhouette darting toward us, her heels clicking faster than decorum allowed. Lena. Daniel. Come with me. Now. You too, Grant. Her voice was low but urgent. Daniel straightened beside me. I spotted Grant a few feet away, talking to one of his groomsmen. Eleanor barely gave him a chance to excuse himself before motioning sharply for him to follow. We all trailed her down a narrow hall behind the kitchen, through a side corridor rarely used by guests, until we reached a private lounge reserved for vendors and staff. Eleanor closed the door behind us with more force than necessary. I'm sorry for the drama, she said without preamble. But this can't wait. She pulled out her phone, hands tight and deliberate. Her fingers shook ever so slightly as she opened the screen and held it out to Grant. This just came in. From Tessa's stylist. Ray. It wasn't meant for me, it was a mistake. But you need to see it. Grant took the phone, confusion flickering in his eyes as he tapped the image to zoom in. I watched his expression dissolve. First disbelief, then something deeper, almost like betrayal wasn't new to him, just that it was never supposed to come from someone like her. What is this? He murmured, but no one answered. He turned the phone so we could all see. It was a screenshot from a group text thread between Ray and a few other wedding vendors. In the middle of the chatter about makeup touch-ups and veil positioning, there were several messages from Savannah. Savannah. Make sure Eleanor sees the earrings. Flashy enough to distract. Savannah. Grant is sweet but clingy. He's like a golden retriever who thinks I hung the moon. It's manageable. Savannah. I'll stay married 18 months. 2 years max. Then I cash out. She's a rich old woman and he's too easy. Worth the wait. There it was. Cold, cruel. Strategic. The air was punched out of the room. Grant blinked slowly, then lowered the phone. She said, "Cash out?" He said, almost to himself. Daniel stepped forward. Who else has seen this? Just us. And Ray. She sent it by mistake, then called in a panic. I didn't say anything to Savannah. Not yet. Eleanor's voice was calm, but beneath it was something dangerous. She'd clearly been betrayed before, but never publicly. Never with this much calculation. I looked over at Grant. His face had gone pale, lips pressed tight. I expected anger, but what I saw instead was devastation. She never said anything like this, he whispered. Not to me. Not even close. You really think she would? Daniel said gently. Grant sank into the couch like someone had knocked the floor out from under him. I wasn't sure if I should comfort him or stay out of it. But then he looked at me. Lena, did she ever say anything? Anything that would have made you think this? I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I didn't want to be the one to speak it aloud. There were moments, I said. Ways she talked about your family. About expectations. She always made it sound like an arrangement more than a relationship. Why didn't you say anything? Because you looked happy, I said softly. And you never would have believed me. Grant didn't respond. He just looked down at his hands like he was trying to hold something invisible together. Eleanor was pacing now. I trusted her. God, I vouched for her. Told my friends how grounded she was. How genuine. She had me fooled. She turned suddenly to me. How long have you known? Not about the messages. I saw them the same time you did. But her motives, they were never hard to guess. I just didn't think it was my place. Eleanor nodded, absorbing that with surprising calm. Then she took a breath, sat on the edge of the chair across from Grant, and said, You don't have to go through with this, honey. The wedding's in 40 minutes, he replied flatly. That doesn't mean you have to walk into a trap with your eyes wide open. Silence fell again. Daniel finally spoke. If you need to call it off, I can help handle the legal side of things. Quietly, cleanly. No media, no social scandal. It's doable. I was reminded, in that moment, how much strength Daniel carried. Not in a loud way, but the kind that filled a room and anchored it. I reached for his hand and squeezed it. Grant stood up slowly. I need to talk to her. Alone. We all nodded. He walked out without another word. When the door clicked shut behind him, Eleanor turned to me again. What would you do if it were you? I exhaled. Honestly, I'd leave. But I also know what it's like to wait too long, to hope someone will love you the way you've been loving them. You end up wasting years waiting for people to wake up. She studied me for a long moment, then gave a small, hollow smile. Maybe it's time someone finally woke up. I nodded. Then, without another word, Eleanor rose and stepped into the hallway, leaving Daniel and me alone. He looked at me like he was seeing all of me, not just what I said but what I held back. You knew this day would come, didn't you? I did. And you're ready? I don't know. But I'm not afraid anymore. We stood in silence for a beat longer. The music from the ballroom swelled again, muffled but distinct. But for the first time, it wasn't the soundtrack to someone else's life. It felt like the prelude to something finally real. By the time I returned to the lounge, Eleanor had already gathered everyone. The room felt smaller than before, like the walls had quietly inched inward while I was gone. Daniel stood by the window, arms crossed, calm but alert. Grant sat stiffly in the armchair, his hands clenched into fists on his knees. Diane was pacing in front of the fireplace, muttering under her breath. Richard, my father, leaned against the far wall, his eyes as unreadable as ever. Tessa was the last to arrive, floating in like a delayed storm cloud. "What is this, a tribunal?" she said lightly, trying for humor. No one laughed. Eleanor didn't waste time. "I received a message meant for someone else. It contains screenshots of your private conversations, Tessa. About me. About Grant." Tessa blinked, then smiled carefully, as if gauging which face would serve her best. "That's ridiculous. Why would I say anything about you? I adore you, Eleanor." Grant stood. The motion was quiet but heavy. "Don't, Lee. Not now." Tessa looked at him, brows knitting just slightly. "What are you talking about?" He walked to the center of the room and held up his phone. One swipe, then another, and the screenshots filled the screen. Her eyes darted across them. Her lips parted. For a second, her mask slipped. Then she laughed, breathy and almost convincing. "Come on. This is taken out of context. We were joking. You know how girls talk. I was just venting." "Venting?" I said sharply. "About cashing out after 18 months? Tessa's gaze flicked to me with practiced disdain. "Oh, please, Lena. Don't act like you care about this marriage more than I do. You've been waiting for me to fail since we were kids." I took a slow breath, but Eleanor cut in before I could respond. "You used me, Tessa. You played the part, and you lied. About love. About family. About everything." Grant looked like he'd been sucker punched again. "I would have done anything for you." Tessa didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any defense. That's when Diane stepped forward, arms out as if to shield her youngest. She didn't mean any harm. Girls say things. They exaggerate. She's just stressed, Eleanor. Don't blow this out of proportion. Grant turned to Diane, voice sharp now. "You're defending this? Defending her plan to marry me for status and money and leave me?" "She wouldn't actually do it." "It was just talk," Diane insisted. My chest burned. I had heard enough. The room spun, filled with old echoes and new wounds. I was tired of silence, tired of pretending that things hadn't always tilted in Tessa's favor. "She's always been your favorite," I said. "Always. And you've covered for her since day one." "That's not true," Diane snapped. "Is it not? Let's talk about the time you forced me to give up my scholarship to stay home and help pay off the mortgage. The scholarship I worked years for, the one that would have gotten me out. That was different. You were older. We needed help. No, you needed someone responsible. And Tessa? She got to float. Got to chase modeling for 2 years, rack up credit card debt, crash her car twice. Who bailed her out? Me. I worked nights to keep your accounts from defaulting." Tessa crossed her arms. "So now you want a medal? Because you were the martyr?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. "Number, I want the truth said out loud. Just once." The room fell into stillness. Richard cleared his throat. His voice came low, slow, but full of weight. "Lena's not lying." Everyone turned to him. Diane's eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying she carried this family. When we were drowning in debt, it wasn't you or Tessa who saved us. It was Lena." I watched her take that night shift at the hospital, watched her send us half her pay every week, even when she lived on ramen. And we let her. Tessa's mouth parted. Diane looked like she was waiting for the ground to open. She never complained, Richard continued. Not once. You want to talk about loyalty? About sacrifice? Look at your older daughter. Without her, this family would have fallen apart long ago. Diane turned to me, her lips trembling. I didn't know. You did, I said quietly. You just didn't want to admit it. Grant stepped back, face pale. This whole thing. I don't even know who I've been marrying. Tessa moved toward him. Grant, please. You're just overwhelmed. I can explain. He shook his head. You don't need to. I think I finally see everything clearly. The door creaked as it opened slowly. Outside, the music continued, muffled and bright, as if this storm didn't exist. No one moved. No one chased him. Diane sat down, as if her legs could no longer hold the weight of it all. Daniel took my hand. You okay? I nodded. But what I felt wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was something quieter. Something that had waited years to finally exhale. The room hadn't cooled down, but the atmosphere had turned glacial. Everyone stood in a circle, physically close but emotionally scattered. I felt the fracture lines growing beneath us, deep and old. Grant cleared his throat and stepped forward, holding a thick envelope. I wasn't planning to bring this up tonight. But after what Eleanor showed us, I don't think silence helps anyone anymore. He opened the envelope and laid out a series of documents on the coffee table. Bank statements, credit card bills, screenshots of transaction logs. Tessa's eyes barely flicked down at them. She kept her posture rigid, like if she didn't blink, the storm might pass. Grant pointed to the first page. This is my Amex. I let her use it once for a deposit on the venue. After that, I stopped paying attention. I trusted her. His voice caught for a moment before he continued. Over $32,000. In less than 5 months, bridal couture, spa retreats, designer bags, plane tickets to LA twice. All booked under her name but charged to my account. He flipped to the next sheet. Then there's this. 2 separate wire transfers from my savings unauthorized. One went to an account under the name Coastal Bloom Events. Except that company doesn't exist. It's an LLC registered to Tessa's apartment address. I had my bank investigate. Tessa finally spoke, her voice small but sharp. I told you I was taking care of wedding logistics. That's what that was. Grant looked up, disappointment blanketing his face. You hired yourself and paid yourself with my money? Tessa's lips pressed into a tight line. No answer. Eleanor leaned forward, eyes narrowed. And what about this? She held up her phone, tapping on a message thread. The stylist Maya accidentally texted me a screenshot meant for someone else. In it, Tessa referred to me as, and I quote, a rich old cow who better stay out of the prenup. Then she called Grant stupidly manageable. A sharp breath escaped from Diane, who had been hovering like a stunned ghost. That can't be right, she murmured. That doesn't sound like Tessa. It was my number, Mom, Tessa snapped. Of course, it sounds like me. Silence fell again, colder now. Colder even than Grant's trembling hands. Daniel broke it, his voice cool and professional. And there's this. As Lena's legal partner, I performed a routine public records search. Tessa had already retained a divorce attorney. The paperwork is dated 6 weeks ago. You don't know what I was going through, Tessa said, standing tall now. Planning a wedding with your family breathing down my neck. Everyone wanted something. I was just trying to protect myself. By stealing? Grant's voice cracked. Or lying. You lied too, she fired back. You lied about loving me when all you ever cared about was what your mother thought. Don't you dare deflect this, Eleanor said, rising slowly from her chair. You planned a marriage like a business deal. And then you filed for an exit strategy before even walking down the aisle. Richard's father cleared his throat. It was the first sound he'd made in 20 minutes. He looked at Diane, then at Tessa. We failed you. That much is clear, but Lena turned to me. Lena has held this family together through everything. Mortgage payments, medical bills, taking care of your grandmother when we couldn't. I didn't do any of that for recognition, I said quietly. Exactly, he replied, and that's why you deserve it. Tessa laughed bitterly. So this is your redemption arc, Lena? Getting the whole room to finally clap for you? I'm not here for applause. I just stopped being the one cleaning up everyone's messes while getting trampled in return. Diane stepped forward, her face pale. I didn't know. About the credit cards, the money. Any of it. That was the problem, I said. You never wanted to know. Not when it was easier to believe your favorite child was flawless. Diane winced, but didn't deny it. Grant looked drained. He gathered the papers back into the envelope slowly. I was going to marry someone who planned her escape before I even proposed. Tessa opened her mouth, but he held up a hand. Don't. I don't need another carefully rehearsed apology. I needed the truth. And I got that just not from you. He looked at me. You always saw things as they were, didn't you? I didn't answer. Some wounds don't need more words. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that sets in right after a dam breaks before everyone figures out how to survive the flood. Tessa sank back into her seat, all her bravado evaporated. Her makeup perfectly applied hours ago had begun to smudge. Her image, like her plans, was falling apart in real time. I stepped out onto the balcony, the cold air wrapping around my shoulders like a fresh truth. Inside, a family fractured. Outside, I breathed for myself. For the first time, not to keep others afloat. The cold outside was bracing, but the heat inside that room still radiated in waves. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, watching the shadows of people moving behind the sheer curtains until I heard the glass door creak open behind me. I turned, expecting Daniel or maybe Grant. But it was Tessa. Her heels clicked sharply against the wooden floor as she approached, her dress slightly torn at the hem and mascara streaked under her eyes. Her expression twisted somewhere between fury and desperation. You think you've won, she hissed. I didn't answer. I had no interest in whatever game she thought we were playing. You just couldn't let me have one thing, could you? Not Mom, not the spotlight, not even this day. Her voice grew louder. People inside the ballroom probably heard. I didn't flinch. Tessa stepped closer until she was right in front of me, eyes blazing. Then her hand flew up. I didn't move. I didn't raise a hand or brace. I just looked at her, calm. But the slap never came. A blur of movement caught the corner of my eye, and suddenly Eleanor was between us, one hand gripping Tessa's wrist midair, the other steadying her by the shoulder. Enough, Eleanor said firmly. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut cleaner than any scream. Let me go. Tessa shrieked, trying to yank free. You don't get to touch me. She pushed backward, stumbling as her heel caught on the edge of a rug. Her balance gave out, and she tumbled through the open French doors behind us right into the view of the entire ballroom. The music stopped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned. Tessa scrambled to her feet, dress bunched at the knees, face red with fury and humiliation. She pointed a shaking finger at me. She ruined my life. She planned this. She's jealous and bitter and cruel. No one moved. Not Grant, not Diane, not even the distant cousins pretending to sip champagne. I walked in slowly behind her. My voice, when it came, was clear but quiet. No one ruined anything, Tessa. You did that yourself. A ripple of whispers swept through the room. Grant stepped forward from the center of the ballroom, his face pale but composed. He held a folded document in his hand. For anyone wondering, he said, his voice even, this is a legal annulment agreement. Not signed yet, but dated. I had a copy drafted yesterday just in case. He looked directly at Tessa. You told me you wanted transparency. So here's mine. We're done. There won't be a wedding tonight, or ever. Gasps echoed from one side of the room. Some guests took a step back, unsure of where to look. Diane moved toward her daughter, arms half lifted, but Tessa shoved past her. "You all think I'm the villain?" she shouted. "What about Lena? She manipulated everything." I didn't flinch. I didn't answer. Because I didn't need to. Tessa looked around the room, scanning for someone he knew who might come to her defense. But the silence was suffocating. No one came. Grant turned to Eleanor and handed her the paper. Then he walked out the main doors, shoulders straight, eyes dry. A few guests hesitated before slowly trickling out behind him. The string quartet in the corner quietly began packing up their instruments. Waitstaff hovered, uncertain. The cake stood untouched, absurdly perfect under a chandelier that now felt far too bright. Daniel approached me from the side, gently touching my elbow. "Are you okay?" "I think so," I said. Then, after a pause, I added, "I didn't want it to end like this." "Sometimes things need to break loudly so people finally hear what's been shattering for years," he said. I looked over at my mother. Diane stood frozen, her hands clasped at her chest, eyes on the floor. Richard had joined her side, a rare crease in his usually impassive face. Tessa was gone, stormed through the side doors in a swirl of white fabric and broken pride. I walked to the center of the room. People were still watching me. I took a breath. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I said. "I know this isn't how anyone thought the evening would go." A few awkward chuckles. Some sympathetic nods. But sometimes truth comes late. And when it does, you face it head on, or you let it rot everything in silence. We chose truth tonight. Then I stepped down, back into the quiet edges of the room, the place where I had always been expected to remain. But this time, not in shame. This time, it was on my terms. I didn't expect the room to hold its breath again, but it did. There was something about silence after chaos. It lingered like smoke. Tessa was still near the center, visibly shaking, clutching the folds of her dress like she was holding herself together by threads. Grant hadn't moved. He stood next to Eleanor, the document still clenched in one hand, the other stuffed in his pocket like he needed an anchor. Diane was murmuring something under her breath, her hands wringing the hem of her sequin jacket. Richard stood behind her, but his face had changed. The weight he always carried silently now looked like resignation. Tessa turned to Eleanor, her voice cracking. "Please. I didn't mean it. I didn't know she'd show those messages. It was just talk. Just nerves." Eleanor didn't blink. She tilted her head and replied, "I've spent too much of my life being polite to people who saw me as a wallet. That ends today." Tessa looked around, searching for another lifeline. Her eyes landed on Grant. "You know I love you," she said, stepping toward him. "You know I was just overwhelmed." Grant shook his head. "I knew something was off. But I thought it was just cold feet. I didn't think." His voice trailed off. Then, from one of the tables near the back, a man stood up. Tall, sandy-haired, with the cautious energy of someone debating whether to make a scene or a point. My stomach sank. It was Adam. I hadn't seen him in years. He walked forward slowly, stopping just short of the circle. Everyone's eyes turned toward him. "Sorry," he said, glancing at me, then at Tessa. "I didn't plan to say anything tonight. I came because I thought. I don't even know what I thought. Closure, maybe. Curiosity." Tessa's face blanched. Her hands fell to her sides. Adam continued. "I dated Tessa. Years ago, we started when I was with Lena. She told me she was better suited for me, more ambitious. Said Lena wouldn't understand my goals. I was stupid enough to believe her." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. A few gasps, some people turning away. I kept my face still. My chest, though, felt like it was splitting in two. Not from hurt anymore. From how little surprise I felt. Adam looked at Grant now. "Just know, if she tells you something out of convenience, you might want to dig deeper. She's practiced." Tessa's voice was barely a whisper. "You came here to humiliate me?" "No," Adam said. "I came here because I thought maybe, for once, I wouldn't let someone else carry the whole weight." Eleanor turned to Grant. "I think we're done here." Grant nodded slowly, then turned toward Tessa. I wanted to believe you. I really did. But the truth is, I've been trying to fix things that were broken long before I came along. I hope you figure out what you actually want. Because right now, all I see is someone who uses people. Tessa's face crumpled. She looked at Diane again, her last hope. But Diane had turned away. Her shoulders slumped, her head bowed. Not even a mother's defense left now. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Tessa finally looked at me. Her eyes no longer held fury. Only something sadder. The loss of control. The fear of being seen as she truly was. This is your fault, she whispered. You waited to destroy me. I met her gaze. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. You destroyed yourself. I just stopped covering for you. She blinked, stunned by the simplicity of it. Eleanor took Grant's arm. Daniel stepped to my side. And the room, which had been holding itself in a tight coil, finally began to exhale. As we walked toward the coat check area fittingly, the same corner where I had been placed at the beginning of the night, I paused. There was something poetic about ending the evening in the same spot it began. But I was no longer the same woman who had stood there hours ago, unsure of whether she even belonged. Daniel took my hand as we sat on the empty bench nearby. You know, he said, I've watched you carry so much for so long, and tonight, you finally let it down. I didn't respond right away. The weight of that truth settled into my bones. I had spent most of my adult life pretending I wasn't hurt. That it didn't matter that my mother loved one daughter more than the other. That it didn't sting every time I was expected to make sacrifices without acknowledgement. Tonight didn't erase all that. But it gave me something else. Closure, maybe. Or simply the ability to stop performing for a family that only applauded when I disappeared into the background. Daniel leaned in. Whatever comes next, you don't have to do it alone. I squeezed his hand. I know. There was movement near the main doors. Guests were beginning to leave, murmuring to one another, careful not to make eye contact. The night was ending, and with it, a version of my family that had long been fractured but now lay exposed under fluorescent truth. One of the servers passed by and handed me a small wrapped slice of cake. Wedding tradition, she said, unsure of everything she'd just witnessed. I took it, smiling gently. Thank you. When she walked away, I placed the cake in my lap and stared at it. Tessa's wedding cake. A symbol of something meant to be sweet, celebratory. Now just another quiet artifact from a day that turned out to be about endings, not beginnings. I didn't eat it. Instead, I stood, wrapped it back up, and walked it over to the trash. I paused, then set it gently on the lid instead. Let someone else decide what to do with it. Daniel opened the car door for me, and as I slid into the passenger seat, I felt something shift. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, but it was mine. That mattered more than I expected. We pulled away from the estate, its glowing chandeliers fading into the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. A week passed like fog lifting off a lake, slowly, reluctantly. The silence in my phone was louder than anything I had ever heard. I left the family group chat without fanfare, no last message, no dramatic exit. Just a quiet disappearance appropriate, I thought, for someone who had been invisible most of her life. Diane texted me the next morning. I'm sorry. I didn't know it had gone that far. I read the message once. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I'd find the words, but that day wasn't today. I was done explaining myself to people who never truly saw me. Daniel and I had taken a few days off work and rented a small cabin by a lake outside of Asheville. It had rained for 3 days straight, but we didn't mind. We spent mornings wrapped in wool blankets, drinking coffee on the porch, listening to the water drum gently on the roof. No wedding chaos. No expectations. Just space to breathe. One evening, I pulled out an old photo album from my suitcase. I'd packed it on instinct, unsure why. Maybe I'd wanted to remind myself I hadn't imagined it all. The Christmas photo from 15 years ago slid out from between the pages, curling slightly at the edges. I stared at it. There we all were. My parents in the middle, beaming. Tessa front and center in a red velvet dress, holding the dog. Me, 3 inches from the edge of the frame, half-shadowed, in a plain green sweater. Smiling, but only barely. I remembered that day vividly. I'd baked 3 pies, cleaned the house, set the table, wrapped all the presents when Mom had forgotten. Then Tessa showed up 2 hours late with her new boyfriend and was immediately the star. That night, no one mentioned the pies. Daniel came over and glanced at the photo. "That the one you told me about?" he asked gently. I nodded and handed it to him. He looked at it for a moment, then carefully placed it back into the album, shut the cover, and set it aside. "You don't live in that frame anymore, Lena," he said. I smiled, not a sad smile, not a wistful one. A real one. Because he was right. The day we got back to Atlanta, I made changes. I cleaned out my closet, not the clothes, but the emotional clutter. I boxed up the photos, the notes, the cards signed with guilt rather than love. I kept only what felt genuine. I changed the wallpaper on my phone. It used to be a family picture from some reunion years ago. I replaced it with a photo of the lake, just water and sky. It felt more like home than my actual home ever had. Emails came in from my aunt, asking what had really happened at the wedding. I didn't reply. Another from my cousin, saying she was proud of me. That one, I answered with a simple thank you. A few colleagues at work had heard whispers through mutual friends. One asked if I was okay. I told her I was. Because I was. Not whole, not untouched, but okay. One night, Daniel and I sat on our small balcony with a bottle of wine. The city buzzed below, but we stayed quiet. "Do you feel free?" he asked me. I thought about it. The word was too simple, too light. What I felt was heavier, but in a good way. Grounded. "I feel like myself," I said. "For the first time in a long time." He nodded. "That's better." The next morning, I got up early and opened my journal. Not the one I used for work or goals, a personal one. I flipped past the entries where I had tried to justify my pain, tried to reason with memories. I started a new page and wrote only one line. "I don't need to be in the frame to matter." Then I closed the book and placed it on the shelf. Later that afternoon, Daniel found me in the kitchen, holding a photo frame I hadn't seen in years. It was from college, before everything started unraveling. Just me, holding a paintbrush, laughing. No one else in the picture. "You should hang that," he said. "I think I will," I replied. So I did. The frame didn't match the rest of the apartment, a little scratched at the corners, glass slightly chipped, but I hung it anyway. It was mine. A moment I owned, unfiltered by anyone else's version of me. That day, I made pasta from scratch. Not because anyone expected it or would praise me for it, but because I wanted to. The small act felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized I'd lost, a simple joy unmeasured by usefulness. As the water boiled, I thought of my mother. I hadn't heard from her again. No follow-up text, no calls, just silence. And strangely, it didn't hurt, not in the way it used to. There was a time when her silence was the loudest thing in my life, echoing like a hollow through every choice I made. But now, it was just quiet. Tessa didn't reach out either. According to a mutual friend, she had flown to Mexico the day after the wedding. That wasn't. Probably chasing some version of herself that still believed she could outrun consequences. I didn't feel sorry for her. But I didn't hate her either. I just released her. That was the word that kept circling in my head. Release. I released the need to be seen. I released the idea that worth had to be earned in comparison. I released the notion that love had to be begged for or proven. I released the part of me that believed I was broken for not being chosen. Daniel and I spent that Sunday walking through Piedmont Park. The breeze was crisp, golden leaves scattering in spirals on the trail. He bought me a hot cider and kissed my temple like it was just another day, and, I guess, beautifully, it was. "You seem lighter," he said. "I am," I replied. I really am. We sat on a bench overlooking the lake, the city skyline stretching beyond it, soft and steady. You think your mom will ever change? He asked. I paused. Maybe. Maybe not. But I don't need her to. That's the difference now. Daniel nodded. I knew he understood. He always did. I used to think healing meant fixing what was broken between us, but it doesn't. Healing, I've come to learn, is sometimes just accepting that the apology might never come in loving yourself anyway. Later that night, I cleaned out the last drawer in my bedroom. Tucked at the bottom was a letter I'd written to myself 5 years ago. It was a list, really. Reasons I thought I didn't matter. I read every line. Not to believe it again, but to bear witness. Then I tore it up. Not with anger. Not even with sadness. Just peace. Somewhere around midnight, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Not to fix anything, not to critique, just to look. And for the first time, I didn't see someone in the background. I saw someone who chose herself. My reflection smiled. So I smiled back. A week later, I started painting again. Small canvases at first. Soft colors. Scenes from memory that used to ache me: childhood bedroom, the old maple in the backyard, the worn hallway outside my college dorm. But they didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt like pieces of a life I finally understood. One afternoon, I mailed a canvas to my dad. No note, no explanation. Just a picture of the lake from our Asheville trip. A quiet offering, a way of saying thank you for finally seeing me, even if it came late. He replied 3 days later with a photo of it hung in his office. Just one line in the message. You've always been the anchor. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. I cried, then. Quietly. Not because I needed validation, but because it was the first time in my life someone had said it out loud. And it mattered. On the anniversary of the non-wedding, I booked a trip. Just me and Daniel. No family, no obligations. We hiked the redwoods, stood beneath trees older than any grudge, taller than any past. Looking up, I whispered a thank you not to anyone in particular, but to the woman I had become. The one who didn't wait to be picked. The one who chose herself. So here I am, telling you this story, not because it ends with revenge or reconciliation, but because it doesn't. It ends with something softer. Something harder to earn. It ends with freedom. And maybe you're listening right now because a part of you recognizes that silence. That ache. That edge of the frame where you've stood too long. So I'll ask you. Have you ever had to walk away from a place you thought you belonged just to save your own peace? If you have, you're not alone. Type 1 in the comments if you've been there. And if you want to hear more stories like this of quiet strength, of unseen battles, of choosing yourself when no one else would hit subscribe. There's more ahead. You're not in the background anymore. You never were.